Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to welcome you all today to the MedTech session. We have three presentations. The Venovo system, which Stephanie Glock from Beckton Dickinson will discuss. The Zephyr valve system, which Sri is going to discuss from Pulmonx. And then the gentle wave system, which Bjarne Bergheim is going to discuss from Senato. What we're going to do is just put a question up so that you can all see it. Thank you so much. Well, we'd like to start the session now. And as I mentioned, the first speaker will be Stephanie Glock from Beckton Dickinson, and she's going to try to direct some points on the novel venous stent system that her company has developed. Stephanie?
Hi, thank you, Dr. Langer. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Koch. I am the Vice President of Research and Development for Becton Dickinson, specifically our Peripheral Intervention Division. And I'm super excited to speak with all of you today and tell you a little bit about our technology. So the product we have submitted and that is up for nomination this year is the Venovo venous stent system, which is indicated for the treatment of symptomatic iliofemoral venous outflow obstructions. I know that's quite a mouthful. And if I step back and just describe the disease that we're really treating here today, this is a subset of venous thromboembolism, or VTE. And venous thromboembolism consists of two specific diseases: deep vein thrombosis, which many of you may be familiar with, is when get blood clots that typically form in your veins in your legs. And it also can result in pulmonary embolism, which is one of these clots can actually release from your legs and go into your lungs. This disease affects 900,000 patients in the US annually, 100,000 of which die each year. And it can cost the healthcare system between $2 and $10 billion annually. So it has a significant clinical impact on patients' lives. The other unique thing about this disease is it's heavily impacted by women, especially many young women. And these women feel significant leg pain, swelling, and can also have ulceration in their legs. Typical treatment, medical treatment for these patients is medication management. It's a conservative approach, or compression stockings to alleviate the symptoms. However, in 80% of these cases, these women and men who suffer from this disease, these conventional therapies don't actually work. There are some endovascular treatments that are used today, but prior to 2019, so just 2 years ago, there were no stents within the US that were actually indicated for this specific disease. When physicians were treating these patients, their only options were to use an arterial stent or a biliary stent, which were not designed to specifically meet the needs of iliofemoral venous obstructions. So the focus of our team has really been over the last many years to treat this significant unmet disease state for so many patients within the US. When I think about the clinical impact of this that our device has had and what clinical results we've seen, our product did have to undergo the PMA process with FDA, which required a full clinical trial. We enrolled 170 patients in our US clinical study known as Vernacular, and the clinical outcomes we saw were incredible. We had a 96.9% primary patency rate in patients who had non-thrombotic iliac venous obstructions. So this is also known as May-Thurner syndrome. And we saw a 81.3% primary patency rate in with post-thrombotic syndrome, and that was both at 12 months. At 24 months, we saw a 95.2% primary patency rate with May-Thurner syndrome patients and 73.4% primary patency rates with those with post-thrombotic syndrome. We had 100% accuracy in the deployment of all of our stents. And we also saw significant improvement in the quality of life. But we had two secondary endpoints of our clinical trial that saw significant improvement in the venous clinical severity scores and this quality of life measure. When I think about the patient impact and specifically how clinicians have responded and how patients have responded, I have two patient stories I'd quickly like to describe. Our very first patient that was enrolled in our clinical trial Vernacular was a young woman in her upper 30s. She had significant leg pain. She had young children, and it was difficult for her to even be able to interact with her children due to this pain. And after she had the Venovo stent placed, and it's been 3 years since the placement of her stent, because she was our first enroller in our clinical trial, she's still pain-free. Another patient was an 18-year-old female who had significant pain through her May-Thurner's syndrome diagnosis. And she had an arterial stent placed because it was before there were any indicated stents on the market, and it thrombosed within 1 month. It then had to be lysed. They put in another arterial stent, which then proceeded once again to occlude in less than a year. This patient at 18 years of age, tried to take her life due to the pain. And luckily she was not successful. And she ultimately got a Venovo stent. And since then has been pain-free and is doing great. So when you think about these two stories, and these are just two of thousands of patients who've now been treated with this stent who are now living pain-free as a result of the Venovo venous stent, you can see, the clinical impact that it's had on patients' lives as well as clinicians as well, and their ability to provide the right solution to their patients. Along as well, one of the other things about it is, technology is not easy to develop, and we did go on this journey. It was a 6-year process for us from start to finish to develop the Venovo stent. We spent about 3.5 years developing the technology from an engineering and design perspective, and then spent 2.5 years in clinical trials to get it approved through FDA and on the market. And the biggest hurdle for us in developing this technology was really to understand the true unmet needs and the differences in veins versus arteries. There is a significant amount of literature and research that's been done on arteries in designing stents and understanding their loading conditions and understanding the flow dynamics, both in coronary artery disease as well as in peripheral arterial disease. But when speaking about venous disease, this is not the case. There's not as much research that's been done to understand how veins differ, the loading conditions associated with veins. They're extremely compressible. So the design characteristics that need to go into this device are quite different than an arterial stent. Our team spent a significant amount of time working with KOLs, conducting cadaver studies, animal studies to really understand these flow conditions, the loading conditions, and to ensure we had the right fatigue life of this implant that will be living in patients for the rest of their life. So we've created a really incredible, strong radial strength stent that is can withstand the compression in the veins, that is conformable as the veins also need to flex easily. That's also migration resistant as well. And so this unique device design is what's really set us up for this incredible clinical success that we've had with our product on the market. So I think without further ado, that's the summary I'd like to provide of our device. And Dr. Langer, I'll pass it back over to you.
Well, thank you so much. That's an excellent presentation. Now we're going to go over the Zephyr endobronchial valve system, and Sri from Pulmonx is going to discuss that.
Thank you, Professor Langer. Hi, everyone. I'm Sri Radhakrishnan. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at Pulmonx. I've been here with Pulmonx for a little over 12 years, and I've seen the journey this company's been through. So briefly, the Zephyr endobronchial valve is the first of its kind to be approved by the FDA. And it's indicated for the bronchoscopic treatment of patients with hyperinflation associated with severe emphysema, which is a type of severe COPD, if you will. And it's intended for patients who have little to no collateral ventilation. So what it is, it's actually an implantable device which is placed through a simple bronchoscope, which goes into your lungs. And it's used to treat patients who have emphysema. These are patients who had severe COPD or emphysema for several years, where the lung has lost its compliance over time. So what happens is the airways are very are collapsible. There isn't much gas exchange. There's a lot of air trapping. And these patients have a constant sense of breathlessness. So when you have a lot of trapped air in your lung, it's as if you've taken a deep breath, and that's the feeling you have all the time. So these patients constantly feel the urge to have more air, but they can't get it in. And it's one of the worst feelings they can have. You speak to a lot of these patients, they are desperate for any help they can get. So What happens in these cases is what we do with the Zephyr implantable valve is we go in with a bronchoscope, we find part of the lung which is the most diseased and is the biggest culprit in terms of air trapping, if you will. And we place these mini kind of one-way valves in these airways. And what these valves do is over time, they kind of allow the air to escape from this lobe of the lung and don't allow air to come back in. And over time, you get this part of the lobe which collapses. And the remaining part of the lung, which is healthier, can inflate or reinflate, I should say, and kind of restore the breathing mechanics for these patients. So now they're able to take regular breaths and get back to what they do. And when I talk about like how we chose this product, I mean, this COPD is one of the kind of leading causes of death in the US, and it's probably one of the most underreported and underdiagnosed diseases we have. When you look about it, I think there's more than 3.8 million people who are diagnosed with it in the US alone. And when you think about who we specifically treat, even if you take care of all the other disease comorbidities these patients come with, it's more than 1.2 million people globally who we can treat with our valves. So what happens to these patients normally is, like I mentioned, because of their shortness of breath, they end up having reduced physical activity, if you can imagine, right? So they get out of breath too fast, they don't push themselves, and that leads to further muscle deconditioning, which leads to further deconditioning and breathlessness, and they reduce activity further, and so on and so forth. And this leads to a complete downward spiral of their quality of life. And there's data showing that the quality of life of these patients is worse than those suffering from lung cancer, and it has a really high mortality. And it's also got a huge socioeconomic burden because of them not being able to work. And also, most of them are also have anxiety and depression because they cannot participate in social activities. It's among the leading causes of deaths, among the top 5. And the overall cost, direct cost, because of COPD is approximately $49 billion in the US in terms of costs in the year 2020. The range of options in these patients isn't too much, right? So most of them just get inhaled medication, or they get prescribed pulmonary rehabilitation or smoking cessation, which goes only so far, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a chronic kind of progressive disease, and there's not much you can do with the inhaled drugs. So the current standard of care actually is surgery. So people go in and they cut up portions of their lung, which are diseased, and they kind of hope the remaining parts of the lung come up. Or you go for a complete lung transplantation. Now, as you can imagine, there's not too many of these procedures done in the US, and not many patients are eligible because of their advanced disease state. So the company has been around for many years, like I mentioned, and we've completed 4 randomized controlled trials that have been published everywhere from the New England Journal to the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine. We've studied more than 450 patients worldwide in several trials, and our procedural success in the upper 80s in terms of whom we can deliver kind of volume reduction, meaning taking down the part of the lung which is the most diseased. And we've also done a lot of work showing that what we impact are the 3 main endpoints patients care about. We improve their lung function, we improve their quality of life, and we also improve their exercise tolerance, helping them get back to doing activities of daily life. And these are very significant for these patients, right? So we've done a recent study where we dug deeper into the quality of life aspect, and we studied 3 different kind of specific, maybe I'll say 4 different, I should say, different questionnaires, patient-reported outcomes showing that we can improve breathlessness, we improve their energy level, their activities, and also a very important measure of their confidence to leave their homes. Because a lot of these people are so disabled, they haven't left their home in several days or years. So I think for us, we find this multi-dimensional kind of response, which we provide. A lot of patients kind of are thrilled about the outcomes. And the FDA gave us a breakthrough designation for an expedited review, and we got approval in June of 2018. And since then, we've been treating patients in the US. But interestingly, our company already also had approval for this product in Europe for several years. And to date, we've treated more than 20,000 patients worldwide. In terms of its acceptance, given the strength of our clinical data, The therapy is considered standard of care and is in a lot of global guidance documents. In the Netherlands, in the UK, in NICE, in Germany, and also the Global Institute of Lung Diseases, or GOLD, considers us to have a grade A kind of evidence in terms of it being recommended as an option for these patients. So our company has a long tenure, as you can imagine. I've been here 12 years. And it's like Stephanie mentioned, we also went through a PMA process, which is kind of what you would say is the highest bar in terms of risk, which the FDA kind of rigorously examines before we can sell on the market. And it probably represents less than, I think the FDA admits, is less than probably 10% of the products in the market go through this process. We've spent a long time getting this product to the market. And I think some of the challenges this company had in the past was the prior company, whom we acquired, actually went through the process of going through the clinical trials and then failed at the PMA because they were able to show statistical significance, but did not have the clinical significance to kind of get approval. And the problem, I think, or the lesson learned from here is a lot of companies, similar to the experience from our kind of predecessors, is that you try to go for as big of a market as possible, but you don't have the patient selection tools down. I think that's what Pulmonx brought to the table. So we have a very specific CT-based kind of patient selection tool. And then we also have our own kind of proprietary diagnostic system, which helps the physician get into the lungs and find out which regions of the lung will be their best region to treat and will be the ideal responders. So a combination of having patient selection tools, which are tailored to your product, in our case, has helped us kind of get the product on the market. And I think if I were to touch upon things or the lessons learned, I think for all kind of these kind of PMA products, I think it takes a long time. It's taken us 10 years, if you can imagine, from when we began starting to talk about commercializing in Europe and building our diagnostic therapy along with the valves. And so having patient investors has been a plus and a blessing for us, of course. But also, it's also been an important lesson to learn that we have to have good clinical data, right? I think a lot of companies make the fatal flaw of trying to jump too soon into commercialization without having the data, without knowing who are the right patients to treat and target. And I think having a combination of the good device, strong clinical evidence, and having diagnostic devices which help target the right patient population has been kind of a good lesson for all of us and probably good for the team out there as well. With that, I'll stop and I'll pass it back to you, Professor Langer.
Well, thank you. Actually, I'm very impressed. All you are keeping on perfect time, and that's wonderful. Thanks so much. So now the third and final talk is going to be on the gentle wave system. And Bjarne Bergheim, who's the president and CEO of Sonendo, I apologize for all my pronunciations, will speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Langer. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting us here today to speak. I'm Bjarne Bergheim. I'm the president and CEO of Sonendo. I'm part of a great team here in Orange County, California. We are about 200 employees. And today I'll talk about the gentle wave system, which is a system that's indicated for cleaning and disinfection of root canals. And the system effectively consists of a console and a procedure instrument. A procedure instrument that is placed on tooth during therapy and during treatment. So before that, I talk about that, let me give you a little bit of a background on dentistry in general. And I think it's fair to say that dentistry is a very, very commoditized space. And perhaps a good way to talk about it is that dentistry is maybe a forgotten area of life science. You know, we all come from backgrounds of, we all come from cardiology and cardiovascular. We're working on diabetes and we're working on other areas. But how often do we hear about someone speaking about dentistry? And if you look at dentistry in a nutshell, dentistry is really about three things. It's about moving teeth, and it's about replacing teeth, and we call the third category saving teeth. So moving teeth, that's the braces of the world that we're very familiar with. And that has received a lot of attention and actually done quite well. And there's a lot of innovation that's been done in that field in dentistry. Second is this element of replacing teeth. That's when you had a cavity or a root canal and you had to extract your tooth, and now you have to put a implant in place. So now you've replaced the teeth. But the biggest issue in dentistry is the fact that, you know, when we're brushing our teeth at home or, you know, every day, we're not able to clean everything very well sometimes, and we get cavities and we get root canal infections. Really the technical term for this in dentistry is called tooth decay. Tooth decay happens to be the #1 most prevalent chronic disease in the world, both in the United States and across the world. And it is by far the biggest, obviously also area issue in dentistry. And so far, all the focus in dentistry has been on moving teeth and replacing teeth. No one has quite figured out how to actually save teeth. In the United States alone right now, we're on a pre-COVID basis, we're spending about $140 billion every year going after tooth decay. That's a lot of money. So there, you know, and if you look at the different tools that we have today to go after tooth decay, you know, we're using drills, spurs, and files to try to scrape the interior surface of these teeth. These are the tools that were invented 100 or 200 years ago. And obviously, we're probably too much familiar with these concepts of drills, spurs, and files, and no one really likes to talk about these things in the dental office. But it is a big problem, and it's really under the umbrella of tooth decay. So, in tooth decay, as I mentioned, it's really two things: root canals and cavities. And you know, our focus here at Sonendo is the root canal side of this. If you look at current root canals, the way they're currently traditionally treated, they're treated using files. You use these files to try to get into these teeth to scrape things out. Problem is that files can only touch about 50% of the interior of these teeth. So there's a lot of tissue, debris, bacteria, infectious material that's left in these teeth. And that's really what's causing the 20 to 30% failure rates that we see in root canal therapy. So it's, you know, and by the way, there's a lot of different ways to define failure rates in dentistry. The way we define failure rate is more similar to what's been used in traditional areas of life science. You know, if a patient has to come back for a retreatment, we define that as a failure. There are about 40 million root canals treated in the Western world every year. There's about 17 million root canal procedures in the United States alone every year. There's about 300 to 400 million cavities treated in the Western world every year. You know, and the way we do things different than the traditional files that can only touch 50% of the interior surface, we have created this very, very novel and broad spectrum sound that is able to dissolve all the tissues within the root canal system, and also gently remove these and get them out of the tooth. So what we do is we place a procedure instrument on top of the tooth. That procedure instrument dissolves the tissue, and we gently extract this diseased material inside the tooth. It turns out that it's interesting now that we're going through this COVID pandemic. One of the biggest issues within dentistry has been the production of aerosols. So when you're using drills or files, there's these aerosols that are being produced and it's being spread within the dental office. What's unique with the GentleWave system is that we have what's called a closed loop system. So we're actually sealing with the tooth. So when we're actually doing this procedure, we're producing virtually no aerosol because we have this closed loop system. So as I mentioned before, failure rates within root canal therapy is about 20 to 30%. We have seen less than 3% in our clinical trials and also in our commercial cases. The other thing that we've seen with patients and doctors have reported to us is that there is much less post-op pain. So when the patient goes home and have had their root canal procedure, there's less pain in the days following the procedure. That's obviously significant for the patient, but it's also significant for the doctor, because what they've reported to us is that instead of getting phone calls during the middle of the night and evenings or the weekends asking for pain medications, etc., now they can substantially go home and they're done with their job at say 5 or 6 p.m. at night, and they don't have to worry about those patients over the weekend. We've had an incredible response for this therapy. The commercialization of this has been phenomenal. We have, before COVID, we were named the 19th fastest growing company by Inc. 5000. That's obviously in 2019, before this pandemic occurred. At that point in time, we were also named the fastest growing company in MedTech and the fastest growing company in Dentistry. So it's been a great ride. It's a really fun ride. And the good thing here is that obviously we're really doing something that's good, really good for patients. And we've treated, we're approaching now 500,000 patients treated so far since we launched this. And I think it's not just about improving the outcomes of the root canal for us. It's also, I think also, we should take this even broader. What we believe is that there is a connection between oral health and overall disease. And by being able to remove all the tissues and debris within the root canal procedure, we believe that is better for the patient, such that the immune system of the patient doesn't have to fight, obviously, the typical tissue and bacteria that's left in these traditional root canal procedures. So that's a high-level overview. So effectively, we have this general system consists of a console, and we connect this procedure instrument that is placed on top of the tooth between these different things. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Dr. Meyer.
Well, thank you very, very much. Well, I've had root canals, so I look forward to the improvements you're talking about. They're not pleasant, but thank you. Well, I think these were great. So let me just open up and maybe ask each of you a question or two. And in your area, why don't we just, again, we'll keep the order that we had, but as scientists and clinicians, where do you see the next wave of innovations trending in your individual product area? Stephanie, would you want to start?
Sure, no problem. I can go first. So when I think about the technologies that we focus on, so Becton Dickinson is obviously a very large company. Our products span a broad range of life sciences, medicine, and interventional products. In the category of our specific business unit, we're focused on peripheral arterial disease, end-stage kidney disease, venous disease, and oncology. And I think the difference of where I see the future for us is today, or historically, we've been very focused on a single product for a specific intervention. And now where I see the future going is a much broader view and really looking at that patient from start to finish, seeing what that patient journey is and how can we bring patients and get them diagnosed much sooner so that their disease doesn't progress as far. How do we ensure that during the procedure itself, we know we're making the right decisions for the patient with the correct treatment algorithm? So how are we using the right product at the right time for the right patient? And then of course, how are we monitoring the patient? And I really think how we're going to do that is through the use of data. And how can we bring in data to help inform our decision-making, both for the physicians, for the patients, and for industry itself, and making sure that we're bringing the right tools and that the tools that are being used are the appropriate tools for that specific patient. So to me, it's really, I see it looking at a broader patient journey versus just a specific treatment, and really through the use of data and having data help inform us, whether that's sensors on devices or even just gathering data and analyzing it through various algorithms that are created. I think there's a lot of work to be done there that can really fine-tune research for and the right product for the right patient in the future.
Thank you. Sri, what are your thoughts?
So I think in the pulmonary space, I'm going to talk broadly about that in general before specifically Pulmonx plans, because I think there is a lot to be done in pulmonary, because I think it's one of the areas which is probably not as popular as the cardiovascular folks, as you mentioned. So I think it is, the three big ones in the pulmonary space are kind of lung cancer, asthma, and COPD. And I think there's a lot going on in lung cancer, and I'm really looking forward to there being more screening in that area going forward as a policy. Lung cancer claims more people than colon cancer, breast cancer, and prostate put together, and yet in spite of that, there isn't kind of a routine kind of processing done for patients to get a screening CT and why they aren't being diagnosed. So I think there's some work to be done in that, and I look forward to the space moving in that direction for sure. There's a lot of better imaging coming out in terms of lower dose scans and being able to take scans in patients who are still breathing. So that's an area which is very exciting for sure. And I think something which is going to be interesting to see is how robotic assisted surgery kind of helps patients with cancer. I think there's going to be better access to kind of small lung cell cancer, which is out there, which people haven't been able to access before. I think that's going to be an area of interest. For Pulmonx specifically, I think while we look at the space we are in, we treat patients who have emphysema, but there's almost half the patients who have this very specific anatomical variant, which is basically collateral channels, or basically communication between parts of the lung. So even if you place a valve, what happens is you cannot completely evacuate that part of the lung and cause it to collapse, because there's flow coming in from quote unquote the back door, if you will. So what we are interested in finding out is what can we offer those patients, because these are patients who are desperate for help, like I mentioned earlier. And today we just are screening them out from our treatment option. There's nothing available at all, either in the US or abroad. So at least I'd say, at least in the US. In abroad, I think there's a few other therapies that are trying to play with early stage. But in the US, I think what we want to do is we've got a new technology, which we've been kind of working with for several years. And our hope is to get that approved by the FDA and bring it to market. And this is right up your alley, Professor Langer. It's a polymeric foam, actually, which should be kind of helping, exactly, something which helps block these little channels of collateral flow, and then kind of provide kind of long-term fibrotic collapse of these regions of the lung, kind of achieving the same thing as surgical volume reduction and or what we do with valves, but for this group of patients who actually represent almost the exact population of patients we treat today. So that's at least what we're looking forward to in our space.
Terrific. Thank you. Dr. Bergheim, your thoughts?
By the way, I appreciate that doctor title. I'm not there yet, but
okay. That's what they told me. So the foundation just promoted you.
Exactly. I love that. So I'll go with that. So no, but I think if we, as I mentioned before, tooth decay is the #1 most prevalent chronic disease in the world. And we have, we believe at Sonenda that we've solved the root canal side of this. But there's one more thing that remains to be solved in tooth decay, and that's cavities. There's about 300 to 400 million cavities, and some numbers actually go as high as 500 million procedures every year. So this is a large opportunity. Everyone are scared of drills, and even the concept of actually getting a cavity is something that no one likes. If you look at the sheer cost of getting a cavity, you may go into a dentist and you may think that, well, the cost is of a cavity is only $200 or $300 as they're drilling out and putting that filling in place. It turns out that if you're 20 years old and you get a cavity, the net present value cost of getting a cavity is about $2,000. So it's a significant cost to society, and obviously also something that none of us likes to have. The other issue is that drills today, right, is removing a lot of tooth structure. So once you have removed that tooth structure is not coming back. So in the future, we have to be able to clean out these cavities without the use of drills and also improve outcomes. So I hope in 5 years, that's something significant, that's something that we can talk about. The other thing, and this is maybe more so in dentistry than in a lot of areas, I think there is a need for patients to be better informed in dentistry. I think the interesting thing would be the root canal or a cavity today. None of us like maybe going to the dentist, but there's also, I think, a need to be better informed about the therapies that's available. And I think if patients know, the pros and cons of some of these different therapies, I think there's going to be, we're going to be more educated to be able to choose, the better therapies going forward. So that's, I think, on the narrow side, I'd say cavities, and number two, getting consumers better educated and informed about the things going on.
Okay. Do any of the participants have any questions for each other? You don't have to, but if you do, I'll be happy to entertain them.
And from me?
I actually have a question for Bjorn, if that's okay. I'm curious about how long is your typical life cycle? I'm not as familiar with the regulatory path associated with dental products and for a root canal tool. What is your regulatory pathway?
That's a great question, and it's when I've been in the PMA world before, so I decided that I need to have spend some time on the 510K side of life, and that's been a good side. So I think that for us, it's the regulatory path is much simpler because there's less an impact to patient life, if you will, as opposed to in other areas of lifetime. So this is a class 2 510K world.
That's nice. There is something to be said about class 2 devices for sure. We have a mix of products between PMA and 510K. It's definitely pros and cons of each, right? Nice.
Yep, that's right.
Good.
Terrific. Any other, let's see, any other? Yes, Stephanie, there's a question for you from Sam. Are there coatings on this stent, and do they differ from arterial stents?
Great question. So this specific stent does not have a coating on it. There are stents, arterial stents on the market that have coatings. I think probably many people are familiar with coronary stents that are typically Limus-based coatings in the peripheral market. Today, the coatings are paclitaxel, but this stent, Venovo, does not have a coating. It is very different in design than arterial stents. Some of the key differences, it is nitinol-based design, which is very familiar to, or similar, obviously, to many peripheral arterial stents today. However, the design itself is very different in that the structure of the stent and what we, how we've designed it, specifically in that it needs to be extremely high radial strength. So that is an input that goes into the structure of the stent. It also has flared ends on the stent, and that those flared ends are what help prevent it from migrating, because in the venous, veins are extremely compressible. So if you think about it, you can get something like, the best way to describe it is a watermelon seeding effect, or something that wants to move because the veins compress so much more than arteries. So our stent ends are increased compared to the middle of the stent to help prevent that migration and movement. And it also has compression resistance because it wants to compress so much. And that's actually one of the key problems we're trying to solve, especially for patients with May-Thurner's, where the iliac artery is actually compressing the iliac vein. So we're trying to open that up to prevent the artery from compressing the vein due to anatomical reasons. So different design, same material. If you were to look at one stent to another, you might, with a layman's eyes, not think they're very different, but to an engineer and the science that went into designing the characteristics of those stents, they are quite unique and very different. Just one last comment, as far as coatings go, I could see a future with coatings, but the coating technology would need to be probably a bit different because the disease is very different than arterial disease. We're talking very fibrotic, chronic fibrosis type disease, which is not the same as what you see in an artery where you're getting calcifications in arteries. So I could see that as a future as well.
Well, thank you very much. Great answer. Well, I guess, so I think everybody's asked questions. If there are no more, I guess, Jonathan, could we put up the election results, the voting results? So it looks like what was the single most important thing up there was investment in population-based primary care, prevention, and the social determinants of health. That got 50%, followed by the multilateral collaboration and health policy, including, so that's very, very useful. And what got 0% was more public trust in science. Any comments that anybody would like to make on any of this? Well, I guess the newspapers may be disappointed in the answer, but I think that it's excellent. And I just want to thank everybody for participating. All of you did a terrific job. The products sound tremendously exciting, and I think will change healthcare significantly. And just to really appreciate your keeping on time and just wonderful talk. So thank you all, and congratulations on all this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Best medical technology,